Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all. Madam Principal, Professor Nirmal Jindal, Teacher in Charge, Dr. Rajiv Singh, Department of Environmental Studies, Convener, Prakriti Society, Dr. Anupam Sani, Department of Environmental Studies, and all our faculty members, and a guest speaker for today, Ms. Ankita Shukla, and all dear participants. Today, we are gathered here to ponder upon this issue of climate change and how we can solve it. The existence of our planet is unique as it provides life to all of us. But since the recent past, humans have dominated the natural environment in almost everything. It is not only limited to natural environment, but we are also changing the composition of the atmosphere as well. Since the beginning of industrialization in the West, the use of fossil fuels have been rampant. As a consequence, we are witnessing global warming and climate change events at this alarming rate. For this stressing issue, we all want a concrete solution, especially the industries that use fossil fuels on such a large scale. One such mechanism is carbon credit, which has its roots in Kyoto Protocol. To start our event, I would like to ask Madam Principal to grace us with few words. Over to you, Madam Principal.
Much. Honorable Speaker, Ms Ankita Shukla, sorry, our convener of environmental studies and in charge, Dr. Rajiv Singh, Dr. Anupam Sani, and all the research scholars, faculty members, esteemed colleagues, and dear students. I welcome you all to this very special program organized by Environmental Studies Department, Satyavati College. And today we have a very distinguished speaker, Ms. Ankita Shukla, to speak on the introduction of carbon credits. As you know, that this topic just to be new, but it is a very, very significant because as it is important that climate change and global warming, these are the most serious threat to the existence of humans, to the entire Earth. So it is very important to curb this carbon emission. Of course, it is linked to industrialization, and it is it has been one of the main source of energies. Even today, it is in the contemporary world. It is considered as one of the main means. But the entire world is concerned with the issue of curbing the carbon emission. And that's why this carbon credits is one of the incentives that is provided to the entire world, that in case we reduce carbon emission, then we can earn carbon credits. And these credits can be transferred, they can be traded, so they have financial underpinnings. So I think this topic is very, very important because country like India, because we are in the developing phase and we are in the industrialization phase, and carbon emission is a serious problem. But we are also exploring certain mechanisms, certain strategies, for the alternate means of energies and other stuff. But carbon credits is the area where we have to learn, and we have to prepare ourselves so that we can get benefited. So I'm sure that Ms. Ankita Shukla's talk will be very, very insightful, and our younger generation, our students will have a lot of takeaways. And they will also think of various different alternate strategies, mechanisms to reduce carbon emission, and also to devise new technologies in the world so that we can contribute significantly to the environment cleanliness and curb the global warming. So I welcome you, Madam Ankita Shukla, and all the students and the faculty members who are associated with this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was very well put and informative. Moving ahead, I would like to call teacher in charge, Dr. Rajiv Singh, Department of Environmental Studies, to share his thoughts and introduce us the speaker of the day, Ms. Ankita Shukla. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Harshita. First of all, I extend my very warm welcome to our Honorable Principals, Ma'am Professor Nirmal Jindal, our eminent speaker, Ms. Ankita Shukla, my colleagues, Dr. Anupam, Manish, Yogita, Chandranshu, Harshita, and all the faculty members of the Satyavati College, and my dear students. I welcome you all to this webinar entitled Introduction to Carbon Credits. As we know, according to recent research, Earth temperature is increasing 0.14 degree in every decade since 1980s. And India is among the countries that are most vulnerable to climatic changes. Therefore, the carbon credits are an important factor nowadays. So to have a better understanding of this topic, Department of Environmental Study is trying to explore different aspects of it. And for this, we have an eminent speaker, Ms. Ankita Shukla. Ms. Ankita is a project manager in South Pole, project manager in South Pole Group, Switzerland, and she's involved in more than 10 carbon credits projects across the globe. And she has a degree of MS in environmental management from Kingston University, UK. So without any delay, I am inviting Ms. Ankita to deliver a talk on carbon credits. Over to you, ma'am. Ms. Ankita ji.
Thank you very much, sir. And firstly, I'd like to extend my thanks and thank you very much for having me here. Harshita, could you possibly confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, Ankita, you are audible. Ankita, do you want me to share your presentation or you are going to do it?
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
I prefer maybe I'll just stop my video so that I am
Yes, you
audible
can
now.
stop your video and present the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Just let me know if in between I lost you guys or if there is some issue in
Yeah,
terms of
sure.
the
Sure.
audio.
Right.
It's not working. I'm not able to stop the share my screen.
Are you able to present your presentation? Share your screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So do you see my screen?
Yes, Ankita, please go ahead.
All right. So first of all, thank you very much. I'd like to extend my thanks to the Faculty of Environmental Studies for having me here. And without causing any delay, let's jump into this carbon credit world. So during this talk and presentation, I would be discussing more about what exactly are carbon credits, how projects can become eligible for carbon credits, and why do we really need those credits. But before that, I am not very sure what pops in your mind when you hear the word carbon credits, because generally when we talk about carbon, we associate carbon with the carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, or environment. Whereas when we are talking about credits, it is more about when we are talking about our finances or something of the monetary terms. Now, the question is, why do we have these terms related? So, or how is it related? So, the question here is, why is there a need to have something known as carbon credits? Well, for a very simple and logical reason, that humans being humans and the world being a capitalist world, we like to talk about nice things and do nice things, but in order to really have that motivation to get the thing going, to really be working against this reduction of carbon dioxide emission, there should be some sort of incentives or some profit that the humans or people look up at. So, before diving in the whole topic of carbon credits, I'd like to give you a brief on who we are as the South Pole Group. So, South Pole Group was founded in 2006, and we are a profit for purpose company wherein we have so far enabled corporates, capital markets, and public sector to reduce their impacts on climate change. And how have we done that? We have done that through the innovative solutions, which are absolutely customized as per our customers and clients. And how are we able to provide such innovative solutions? That is through the diverse expertise that this group has. We are a team of more than 600 people based in 21 offices across the globe, and we have expertise ranging from scientists, advisors to engineers, people from finances, etc. And so far, we have developed more than 700 projects across globe. Now, the question is, why do we need an action? Why there has to be something called as carbon credit in the market? Why do we need to reduce the emissions? And why do we have to do that today? Well, for a very simple, not simple, well, very complicated yet aware cause, that is the global warming issue. And I guess most of us are here from the environmental sciences background and are well aware of the causes that greenhouse gas emissions are causing or the global warming is causing. So, just some of the stats to really see through what kind of problem it is and how big the impact it is leading. So we had 2020 along with year 2016 tied up as the warmest year on record. Then talking about the emissions during the COVID scenario, the emissions did dip during this scenario, obviously because everything was put to halt and everything was shut. But when analysis was made on the long-term impact of climate change, there was no significant difference that was observed for climate change. Next, talking about the fossil fuels still account for some 80% of the global final energy consumption. Further, also the United Nations scientists have actually indicated in one of the studies that we only have 10 years left to cut down the global greenhouse gas emissions before reaching a point where there will be a no U-turn, or where we would not be left with any chance to set things right. So, where are we? Where do we stand as of the moment? We have already reached a mark of 1.2 degrees Celsius warming by the year, or as per 2020 year. And in order to stay within the limits of 1.5 degrees warming, or within those limits, which is also a goal that was set under the Paris Agreement, there is a lot to be done. And that is where the private sector comes into play. Now, talking about pledges and targets, if we stay on the pledges and targets, we would still be somewhere between 1.5 on an optimal target to 3. So something around, we would still have a global warming temperature of around 2.4 degrees Celsius. Whereas if we continue with the current policies across the globe in terms of these environment and climate change, if there are no changes that are actually brought in the current policies, we would land up with around 2.9 degrees Celsius of global warming. And with the most optimistic targets, we will somehow still be able to manage around 2 degrees Celsius of warming. Now, how does private sector comes into play, and what does private sector is actually capable of doing when it comes to combating climate change? Now, this is a bit tricky graph, which I will try my best to explain. So here we have taken a graph where on the y-axis we have got carbon dioxide emissions in kilotons CO2 per year, and we have taken a chart from 2010 to 2070, where we are trying and aiming to reach a climate positive scenario, in especially from the private sector. Now, this yellow part depicts how the emissions will be if the business goes on their usual emissions without really caring about the climate change. Further, in order to actually bring down this curve, how the private sector can work, it can work by helping reduce or decarbonize the area through different technologies or projects. And we and how is this going to be happening? This will happen when we have projects like carbon avoidance projects. Now, carbon avoidance projects are projects whereby we are trying to develop technologies where we are avoiding carbon by switching onto green technology, or through compensating for the GHG emissions that are caused by the private sector. Further, if we are able to achieve that target of net zero, we can also be then accelerating the private economy into carbon removal projects, where we are not only reducing the carbon emissions or avoiding carbon emissions by switching onto the green technology, but also trying to remove carbon dioxide emissions which are already present in the atmosphere. So that is known as carbon removal projects. Now, just to make you understand of these terms a little better, we have the next slide. So the three most important words that we need to be very clear of is climate neutral. Now, when does the sector reach climate neutral? It reaches climate neutral when the private firms reduces or compensates the company's greenhouse gas emissions with any type of certified carbon credits, resulting in no net increase of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, how can we do that? See, reduction can happen if the company is involved in any type of green technology. And when it is involved in any green technology, or when the project is something like a renewable energy project, it is helping switch the energy from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable economy, thereby helping reduce the emissions. Or there could be situations where the companies are just not capable of reducing their emissions because their technology, their project type doesn't allow them to be one of them. So how do they actually become climate neutral then? They become climate neutral by compensating for the greenhouse gas emissions. And how do they compensate it? They compensate it by actually buying the carbon credits from those companies which are generating these carbon credits, that is, the companies which are actually producing these green technologies. And that's how the companies can become climate neutral. Now, well, with due course of time, the next stage after climate neutral is trying to achieve a net zero scenario. A net zero scenario can be achieved when we are trying to reduce the anthropogenic emissions, that is, the human caused emissions, in line with science through techniques and technologies, whereby we are also removing the carbon from the atmosphere or any remaining emissions. So, for example, we can the carbon removal projects such as the carbon capture and storage, whereby the companies are actually trying to capture the direct carbon from atmosphere and store it under reservoirs or many so we have got different storage sites for that. And after net zero, then a super ambitious goal for any firm is to become climate positive. And when can a firm become climate positive? It can become climate positive when the firm or the company is actually generating more emissions rather than removing it. So I hope these three terms are very clear. So with climate neutral, the companies are trying to compensate and reduce their GHG emissions through this carbon credits. That's where the carbon credit comes in play. With net zero, we are also trying to remove the carbon which is present in the atmosphere. And climate positive scenario is the one where the companies are actually removing more emissions than the company is generating itself. And how can companies actually achieve that? So these are some of the very broad set steps which one can follow in order to achieve such a climate positive scenario, starting with number one, that is measure footprint and risk. So with each firm or the company or individual or project type tries to understand their carbon footprint, that is how much carbon is being emitted through the firm. For that, we move to the next step, wherein we try to set the roadmap and create targets by developing sustainability strategies and thereby helping reduce the companies to actually reduce their footprint. And how can we do that? So some of the very basic steps are, maybe we give them solutions like increasing on the efficiency, procuring renewable energy, or decarbonizing their supply chain. Further, one of the steps is financing climate action. So companies like South Pole Group is also heavily involved in financing climate action, whereby we actually try to fund companies and technologies which are into avoidance and removal of carbon dioxide emissions. And lastly, communicate and lead, which is one of the key steps, wherein the companies try to engage with the stakeholders, the people working on the ground, and have a very clear, sustainable vision, as well as communicating the results with complete transparency that they have achieved over this due course of time, following the sustainable strategies which were developed for the firm. Now, there is no question that achieving a net zero economy will require many different approaches. So definitely we can achieve a net zero economy through various ways, but voluntary carbon market is definitely one of the very important steps, and carbon credits play a very important role in achieving that net zero economy. Now, moving on to what exactly are carbon credits. So, just for simplification, when we study a project, every carbon credit that is generated is actually equivalent to the ton of carbon dioxide emissions that the project has reduced. That is, so one carbon credit is equivalent to 1 ton of carbon dioxide emissions that are either being avoided or removed from the atmosphere by a certain project. Now, obviously, we are aware that it is not solely carbon dioxide emissions, but there are many other greenhouse gases that are involved that are leading to this global warming. But just for the simplification purpose, and we follow a set methodologies which are present in the United Nations website, wherein we have taken carbon dioxide as just to keep it simple, and all of the greenhouse gases are expressed in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. Now, once we get the project registered under a certain standard, which we will learn about in the coming slides, once the carbon project is registered, it is capable of then generating these carbon credits, which becomes tradable. Now they become tradable, that is, the project owner is able to finance themselves. How? Now they will be capable enough to sell these carbon credits to the firms which are trying to compensate their GHG emissions, and therefore they are issued through a registry. They remain tradable until they retire. So there is a crediting period for every type of project that is registered under the registry, which generally differs on the type of project, on the type of standard we have got our projects registered, and it might be variable. It might vary from 5 years to 7 years into three times renewable set criteria. So it completely depends on the kind of projects and the standard it is being developed under, for which we understand the retiring limit of those carbon credits. Now, a new word, that is voluntary carbon market. What exactly is this voluntary carbon market? So the creation and purchase of carbon credits leads to the existence of the voluntary carbon market, and wherein the demand is driven by carbon neutrality claims and supply is created by the certification of carbon projects. Just to have a clear understanding on the statement, the demand is driven by a carbon neutrality claim, that is, by organizations or private sector or firms that are trying to compensate for their GHG emissions, but their technology does not allow them to be able to cut down greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, the demand is created. They are trying to compensate their GHG emissions by actually buying the carbon credits. And from where do they buy the carbon credits? They buy the carbon credits from companies and firms which are actually involved in this green technology, and they are generating these credits. Now, when they sell this carbon credits to the firms, where which are trying to buy these credits, this will help them finance their project. This will help them upgrade as well as upscale their technology, and also therefore bringing about prosperity and well-being in the economy to a very larger extent. So this voluntary carbon market not only assess the reduction that is being made in a project, but also what kind of other sustainable development goals are being achieved through a particular project. So, buying carbon credits compensates for the unavoidable emissions that you create today by financing projects that reduce or absorb the carbon emissions anywhere in the world. So, I hope I am actually able to make you understand about the complete idea of this carbon credit thing, wherein there are firms which are trying to compensate their unavoidable emissions. And how are they trying to compensate? By buying the carbon credits from the firms that are actually generating these carbon credits. And who are generating these carbon credits? These carbon credits are being generated by project owners which are into developing green technologies. For example, say the safest example is the renewable technology. So if someone has a renewable energy plant set up at a place, therefore it is trying, the plant is actually trying to cut down on a fossil fuel based economy and now switching on to the renewable and clean energy. So this will allow the project owner to actually generate the carbon credits, which in turn will be bought by the firms wherein they try, which are actually trying to compensate for their emissions. And this is how the carbon market or the carbon credit moves in a market. Now, talking about the voluntary market expansion. So this was a very new, a very niche area that got its birth in around 2008. So we can see there were it was extremely new. There were very little projects, but just in a due course of like a decade, by the end of 2020, the voluntary carbon market has so far been able to offset the carbon emissions of around and actually able to issue 500 million carbon credits so far. And therefore the VC market is something that has been growing exponential, especially after this COP26 that was launched in Glasgow this year, the previous year, and the real fight to actually try and combat climate change and stay within the limits of Paris Agreement, that is within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. Now, how exactly are these carbon credits created? So this is a bit of the technical aspect of how the carbon credits are created. So I would like to take an example for that, just for an easy understanding. Let us take an example where we have a landowner, where a person or a project owner develops a project on their land. Now, this could be the same individual as well, where the person is owning the land as well as is the owner of the project. And let us take an example of a renewable plant. So the project owner is actually trying to set up a wind energy plant at its place, which is owned by the project owner itself. Now, the what we do as project developers, we go to their place and assess the project from end to end. That is, the project is actually up and running and it is just not on the paper. There are a lot of steps that are involved in the verification and validation of the project. We hire a third party auditor, and then after the project is approved by an auditor as well, we get that project registered under a certification standard. Once the projects get certified in a standard, so we have different standards across the globe which certify these projects, and after which the project is able to claim credits. So how are they able to claim credits? Like companies like Southco also work as a retailer, where we issue these credits and help the project finance the project, and therefore this is this helps the project owner to actually upscale the technology, as well as to help them bring a positive impact in terms of cutting down the carbon dioxide emissions in that particular area. So this is the kind of cycle that we follow for any typical project that we receive, wherein the first step is we receive a demand that comes from companies which are voluntarily compensating for their emissions through purchasing of the carbon credits. Now, what do? Is we try to work on the climate projects where we assess the project from end to end. We get the project registered, we get it certified. How do we do that? There are a lot of steps involved, there are a lot of data analysis that happens, and then we reach a particular number, and then we get that particular project activity registered under some of the internationally recognized standards like VERA, gold standards, to name a few. The next stage is the monitoring and the verification, where the project owner monitors and reports the emission reduction. So once we have actually registered the project, we generally prefer a time period of 1 year where we cross validate our numbers. And how do we do that? We do that by monitoring the plant for one entire year, and then we record the emission reductions that are brought with the help of this project activity being run in that 1 year. This calculation and the carbon credit numbers are actually reduced using rigorous methodologies. So we actually have a list of methodologies which are developed by CDM under the UNFCCC platform, and we pick up the most suitable methodology for the project type that we have received. We do the calculations, and then the project's impacts further are then verified by these standards, as well as the third party auditor that we hire during this entire process. Once the verification, hiring, and everything is done by the standards as well as by the third party auditor, the project is then able to create carbon credits, wherein one carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide emissions that are reduced or removed, which is generally equivalent to roughly 1 to 3 USDs. And well, it depends on the kind of technology. For example, in recent times, because plastics is one of the new concerns not in the carbon market, so right now plastics has greater carbon credit value as compared to a fairly simpler project like a renewable one. So it completely depends, the value of carbon credit completely depends on the kind of project activity it is. Now, who actually is certifying and issuing these carbon credits? So we have different standard bodies for that. that, for example, we have gold standards, verified carbon standard, that is BCS or Vera, social carbon, the climate, community, and biodiversity standards, and there are many others, for example, GCC, etc. So these standards have their own rules and regulations around each type of project activity and how the project activity can then become eligible to be registered under these standards. Once the project is actually registered under these standards, further, the project becomes eligible to be then issuing carbon credits and financing the projects for themselves. Now, how exactly do projects qualify for carbon credits? Now, what you actually see in these 5 to 6 tabs is actually a due diligence process which actually takes months of assessments for each carbon project that we take. But just to keep it very simple, and just so you have the clear basic idea of what exactly are the steps, I'll try to make it very simple. So we have these 5 steps, starting with real in the sense we go and check that the project is actually up running on the ground and it is just not on paper. So we check that it is, so it's not like a planned project. We see that the project is real in the sense that the project is actually set up and running. Then we look for additionality or additional, wherein we check that the project is actually incapable or basically struggling with the finances, and if we are able to get the project registered under the standards and generate the credits for this project, the project will be able to really upscale and be running in its foremost and the fullest potential. Now, how do we assess that, or how do we check that the project is additional? We do that through certain measurable and verifiable aspects. Now, obviously, when we are talking about the carbon credits are being reduced out of some sort of calculations that we do. And how do we do that calculations? We do that calculations by some numbers that are being reduced from the project itself. For example, when we take a renewable plant, for example, we look into the amount of energy it is generating. So that means the megawatt hour that it is generating becomes a measurable units, which can also be verified with the invoices that are generated, and which allows us to understand that this much amount of energy is being created by a clean energy, renewable energy plant, and this much energy is therefore being cut down from a fossil fuel based economy. So here we if we just take an example of this renewable energy project, what we do, or how do we measure or verify these credits? We take the amount of energy that is being generated by the renewable energy plant, we multiply it with the grid emission factor of that area or the country, and the number that we get is generally equivalent to the generally equivalent to the tons of carbon dioxide emissions that is being avoided through this plant. Now, once it is verified, it becomes permanent. How does it becomes permanent? It becomes permanent by being or by securing a green tick from the third party auditors, from the standards where we are trying to get this project register. And once we get this project register, it is an absolute unique, one of its kind project under that standard, which will be capable of producing the carbon credits for a certain period of time, as much time as the standard allows for that particular project type. Now, what are the different types of climate action projects? Well, what kind of projects we are dealing with, or what kind of carbon projects you can think of, which we can make eligible under these standards is anything and everything that are capable of reducing or cutting down greenhouse gas emissions. For example, the areas or the sectors that you see on the screen is actually the one we are currently being involved in, and we have been working in all of these areas under different types of technologies, starting with the household. So we have up and running projects regarding households, like technologies that are involved in efficient cook stoves. So therefore they help reducing the amount of fuel that is needed for the household task. And this is not only helping reduce the fossil fuel emissions, but it is also helping in achieving some other sustainable development goals, such as the health and well-being of stoves that produced a lot of smoke. So we assess not just the carbon but many other SDG impacts that the project is bringing along. Talking about renewable, well, this is very simple and straight. All of the renewable energy projects are eligible under these carbon project types, simply because they are helping reduce the carbon emissions. They are helping the economy to switch from a heavy fossil fuel based economy to a greener economy. In terms of forestry and agriculture, we are trying to do projects which are more into afforestation, reforestation, as well as conservation and protection of forest areas. We have been very closely involved with RED Plus projects, especially for the conservation and protection of areas which carry or hold a lot of natural biodiversity. Then clean water, we have projects around clean water and sanitation, which is also one of the SDG number 6. I'm not sure if like the bachelor students have already learned about the SDGs and the available SDGs that are there in the United Nations, but SDG 6 is more into the water and sanitation, whereby we are actually, this is one of our projects that we did in Uganda, where we are trying to reduce the fuel that would be needed to boil the water for purification. So generally in the rural areas, people use fuel wood to boil water, and we are trying to cut down that by providing them water filters. So these are the kind of projects we are involved in when we talk about clean water. Further, in terms of innovation in industry, all types of projects that are involved in energy efficiency and circularity, which is helping in bringing a circular economy or a sustainable economy. For example, like distribution of LEDs is one of the projects that we did in India. I myself was involved in that. Sorry. And lastly, the technical carbon removals project, which is one of the most interesting projects, where we are trying to work with firms that are trying to capture carbon from the atmosphere itself and help reduce or remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere directly. So these are the different types of eligible projects which are capable of generating carbon credits for them. And these projects also require these carbon credits, because once the carbon credits are created for their projects, they further try to upscale their technology to widen their horizon and spread their technology across different areas as well. Now, as I already mentioned, the impact goes beyond carbon. How does it go beyond carbon? When we assess a project, it is not purely it is not purely about calculating the carbon dioxide emissions, but also the other SDG impacts that the project is bringing along. For example, the kind of different SDGs that I was talking about. We look for the well-being, we look for the health conditions, employment, and all other SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals, that the project has brought in that area. Therefore, we can say that carbon credits increase the health and prosperity of communities around the world and combat climate change by financing projects. Now, some of the project examples that we have done. So I tried to just cover the entire globe and show you the kind of projects that we have done so far, which range from landscape protection to some of the afforestation and protection activities happening around forests, to wind power plant that was set up in Turkey, in India, one of the most largest and widespread clean cook stove projects that we are doing, and another project that was done in Thailand, which was a solar technology based project. And just to give you an insight of what all things we do in a project, so I have picked up two examples. One of them is a forestry project, that was the Kariba forest protection project that we did. So this was basically, the Kariba forest is a community driven action project. That is, so the project is very much around the community. There is a lot of community that is dependent on the forest for, and therefore is involved in activities like clearing lands and producing charcoal, etc. So we tried to work closely with the community people which were based there and help them build alternative livelihoods, which was actually environment friendly, and thereby helping reduce the carbon emissions through through the traditional activities that they were initially doing, and which has actually helped the forest to be protected since 2011. So far we have protected around 785,000 hectares of Kariba forest, which is also one of the largest registered RED projects by size so far. And the core project teams also like carries out wildlife patrols, coordinating with the early burnings and land management practices. So this is the kind of project, this is the kind of work South Pole was involved in for the protection of wildlife and forest in Kariba. And this is a project which I was myself involved in. This is a project where we talk about the solar off-grid project, and not only the project allowed to help cut down the carbon dioxide emissions, but just a short video to help you understand like what other impacts did the project actually lead in that area. So, so it's a short clip. Let me try to play it for you. Well, I think my net is not working that great. Okay. Well, let's just skip that for the moment. Uh, well, but just to give you a brief on what the project was. So we had this off-grid mounted solar projects that we got installed in extreme rural areas of Jharkhand where there was no light, and therefore it actually helped lift up the economy of that area, because there were like different businesses and little shops that only used to run till the evening time, because after that there was no light. And since the since this solar energy plant got introduced in the area, there were a lot of things that improved in the area. And with the help of the carbon credits that were being generated by Signify, that were being generated by Signify, this enabled Signify to actually increase and upscale their project. And now it is not only just in Jharkhand, but it is also now based in other states of the country as well. So the question is, why is compensation a very important part of this climate strategy? We need to understand that we have to put a price on carbon in order to drive these emission reductions. Once we are able to put a price on carbon dioxide emissions that are being reduced by the technology or by the project types, it automatically becomes very attractive for firms to actually be switching to sustainable ways, and to compensating and reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. Not just that, if we are able to have something called as carbon crediting market, it allows it allows us to actually measure how much of the carbon dioxide emission is being reduced, and we are able to draw a comparison of how far we have come and how far we still are to reach a net zero target for this economy. Just my last points to conclude this slide. What we need to actually remember is that carbon credits fund activities go beyond the regulatory requirements, and it is one of the most important things that can actually help us accelerate our speed to reach these targets, which are set under the Paris Agreement, that is to stay within the limits of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. Next, the carbon credits are based on transparent and robust processes, and I, being myself involved in the industry, can definitely stand by this point. And therefore, carbon credits are fit for purpose in scaling the climate action. And buying these carbon credits puts a price on carbon, incentivizing the company reductions as well as motivating the companies to reduce their GHG emissions. Well, thank you everyone for your time, and now I would like to open the door for any questions or comments that you might have.
Uh, well, thank you so much, Ankita, for this talk. Uh, Not only it talked about the general terms related to carbon credits, but it also took us into the technicalities of the climate change environment and what all the technologies are there in the market and how industry people actually work to get carbon credits. It was very enriching. I'm sure that our participants have learned so much from this talk today. And to reflect their interest in the talk, they have also put up questions in the chat box. So if you allow, we'll have a quick Q&A session So for that, Ankita, can we have a quick Q&A session? Ankita, are you there? All right. I think Ankita has some issue with network. So students can put their questions in the chat box, and I would like to get Mr. Manish sir here to take the question answer sessions.
Yes.
So over to you, sir.
Manish, please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Harshita. And ma'am, thank you so much for such an enlightenment for the carbon credit. There are some questions, the very basic questions that I am getting from the students. Like, I think you are audible. Am I audible to you, ma'am? Ankita, ma'am.
Yes, yes, sir, you're audible.
So there are some very basic questions that students are asking on the board. Like, there are many GHG emissions that is going on simultaneously. So why only the carbon is getting this credit to get the carbon credit? Why we are influencing so much with the carbon ki the carbon is put as a front, or we use the term carbon equivalent. Why not other GHG emissions we are putting through?
Okay, so I am not very sure which question you're pointing to.
Why carbon credit? Why we are using the term carbon credit, though there are many GHG gases that is present, and they are all responsible for the global warming. But we are using the term carbon in general. So why we are
Right.
using this carbon equivalent term?
Right. So, like I previously mentioned, this is a carbon market, and we follow the carbon dioxide emission reduction calculations, which are actually reduced or reduced by the CDM itself.
Okay, next question is ki, on the basis of the provision of the certificates, is it the only the private firms that are providing the certificates, or the government firm are also involved in this type of certificate trading?
So, these are not provided, these are not government based. The standards, gold standards, GCC that we talked about, operate bodies which come in association with the UNFCC and are not related to government.
I think one last third question that is very relatable. I think, am I audible to you, ma'am?
Yes.
One last question I will put through, because this some general questions I am considering them and putting them together. All right. Uh, this is about ki if any company is having two provisions, if they have to go for
Okay.
posing the penalty for the carbon they are emitting, or the other side they have also to buy some carbons in the form of carbon credit. So what the market mechanism so they can more go for opting the carbon credits from the other companies, not for posing the penalties or just giving the penalties to the for the carbon they are emitting. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, but I'm not sure if I understood the question
Okay, then
correctly.
again, I am
Yeah.
recapitulating it.
Sure, sure.
Basically, we are having two modes of, in terms of carbon flexible mechanism. We can also go for the penalties, right? For the carbon penalties,
Right. Right.
polluter pay principle we are having, and then other
Right.
we can have this carbon credit where we can buy the carbon credits. All right.
Right.
So my question is ki what should be the flexible mechanism in terms of ki how can we decide ki that we can go for posing or giving the penalties, or for just buying the carbon credits, because we are having two tracks to go.
Right. So Well, because I work in the industry myself, I would like to actually tell you that polluters pay principles and other mechanisms are not very reliable, and carbon market is the only one that is the most reliable market that has come so far. So this is the one that like the project owners or the firms should try to switch to.
Over to you, sir. Anupam, sir, any questions from the side of the students?
I'm not.
Yeah, it's okay, Manish.
Thank
Manish said there is this very interesting question that asked me to ask Sankita. Before that, a very interesting talk. Most of as teachers, it is really interesting if we have experts like you helping us enlighten our students. So thank you for showing up and sharing your experience with it. There's this one question from a student named Rishabh Singh who's asking me this, and I quote, "We all know that in the recent COP26, India declared that we will attain net zero carbon emission by 2070. A very big promise, if ever one. What do you think? What are the possible strategies that we can adopt on our end to actually meet these claims? What do you think, as a person who is working in this field? What are the adaptations or what are the strategies that Indian government should follow for attaining goals that we have promised by 2070? That's the question. Am I audible? Ram, could you hear me?
I think she is facing some network issue.
I hope she.
I think conclude the meeting.
Yes. So it was a very interactive questions from the student as well, that I am very happy to see that students themselves are interested in this topic and industry relevant data. So to conclude this and give vote of thanks, I would like to call Dr. Anupam Sani, Convener, Prakriti Society, Department of Environmental Studies, to give vote of thanks in this event. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Harshita. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really been an honor to organize such an event and like to be a part of such a wonderful event. So on behalf of Environmental Studies Department, I would like to thank and share a heartfelt gratitude to our first principal. She has always been cooperative and in organizing such an event. And I would also like to thank our teacher in charge, Dr. Rajiv Singh. And also, last but not the least, of course, the most important person of this seminar, that is our special guest, Ms. Ankita Shukla, who has enlightened us today with her talk, and it was really very much informative. Sincere thank to everyone who is part of this seminar, all my faculty members, Dr. Yogita, Harsita, Chandransu, Manish, in fact, all the student representative, the student president, Risu, who is our Prakriti Society president, and his cooperative team. Everyone, thank you so much for organizing such an event. We hope we all will be organizing such an event and giving these informative lectures to our students. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. So the feedback form and the attendance link is in the chat box for all the participants. They can fill the feedback form and they can share us their thoughts about the event. Thank you so much, Ankita, to enlighten us about carbon credits and climate change events. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. And all the participants also. Thank you so much. So
Thank you, everyone. Thank
okay,
you.
how about having a group, I would request everyone to switch on their camera and we can have
yes.
some, we can have some snapshot so that we can use it for a future purpose. Can somebody click for us, like Swali or anyone, any one of you?
You also open your.
Students, please turn up your cameras for taking this event becoming a memory. So let's take a picture.
Okay, take 2-3 photographs because there are around 10 slots there. Around there were 350 students who participated in this webinar. It's a very good thing for us.
Yes, I think that this event is a success because more than 300 participants were there in the event. So kudos to everyone who were involved in the preparation and all the participants also.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Harshita. Good job.
We can end this.
Thank you, Ankita.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you, Ankita.
So with this, we conclude today's seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.